Let's think about a scenario. You've been looking for a new home, and finally, after a long search, you're closing on buying your dream house. But while you're waiting for the paperwork to go through, somebody comes up and asks you, do you know what happened in that house? And of course you don't, so you go to Google and the search results tell you a horrible story. 11 family members were brutally murdered inside of your future home one Easter Sunday. Would you still move in? That's the question that Cinnamon Baker had to ask herself when she was buying the house at 635 Minor Avenue in Hamilton, Ohio in 2008. Her boyfriend's coworker asked them about a man named James Ruppert, and when the couple looked him up, what they found was not pretty.
Discretion is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. My name is Joe, I'm the host, and thank you for joining today. If you stumbled into this podcast on purpose or by accident, I appreciate it either way. If you've never listened before, I hope that you like what you hear and stick around, maybe listen to a few more episodes and subscribe. If you meant to come here and have been a listener for a while, I love you and I want to have your babies, but not in a weird, creepy way, metaphorically. I metaphorically want to have your babies, or baby. Maybe we decide just to have the one baby and spoil it. I don't know. I'm open. All right, that was strange. My bad. Hey, while we're both trying to erase what just happened from our memory, here is your reminder to connect with 10-Minute Murder on social media. Links are in the show notes. Yeah, it was awful. Sorry. Okay, let's get to today's story. From the very beginning, the life of James Urban Ruppert was problematic, to say the least. He was born on April 12, 1934, to Leonard and Charity Ruppert, who already had a 2-year-old son, Leonard Jr. To his mother, James was a huge letdown. Charity had hoped for a daughter, and she made sure that he knew it, as if it was James's fault that he was born a boy. Leonard was not much better. He had a violent temper. He showed his 2 sons very little affection. And not sure why this man had become a father in the first place, because he clearly was not interested in being one. Anyway, Leonard ended up dying in 1947, when James was 12 years old, and James's situation at home didn't get much better. If possible, it got worse. Leonard Jr. became the father figure of the family, and he kept constantly picking on his little brother, reminding James how he was weak and useless. Outside of the house, things weren't any better. James's performance in school became increasingly dismal. With little confidence, he struggled to make friends and basically just faded into the background and was only acknowledged when he was being picked on. Within 2 years after his father's death, James had enough. At 16 years old, he was so unhappy and miserable that he ran away from home one day and tried to kill himself by hanging. But the same way everything else in his life had gone to this point, James's suicide attempt failed, and he went back home. The rivalry between the 2 brothers continued. James flunked out of college after 2 years, while Leonard earned a degree in electrical engineering. James also never stood out physically either. He was just 5'5" and weighed about 135 pounds, while his older brother was taller and more athletic. To make things even worse, Leonard ended up marrying a woman named Alma, and eventually they had 8 children together. The problem here was the fact that Alma was James's ex-girlfriend. It was like Leonard's main purpose in life was to make his little brother as miserable as possible, and he did a pretty good job at that. By the age of 40, James was unemployed and living with his mother, while Leonard had a great job with General Electric and provided for his huge family. On top of that, James had lost most of his money in the stock market crash of 1973 to 1974, leaving him a large amount of debt with his brother and his mother. The little money that he had, James used to buy booze. He drank just about every night. Charity, who still couldn't seem to stand her son, became fed up, believing that if James had the money to get drunk, he had the money to pay rent. She wanted James out of the house and eventually began threatening to evict him. James didn't take this very well. His depression took a dive, and he began to look for a way out of the situation, one way or the other. On March 29, 1975, James was spotted shooting tin cans as target practice along the banks of the Great Miami River in Hamilton. That night, he went out drinking like he always did. at the 19th Hole Cocktail Lounge, and James complained to an employee named Wanda Bishop about his difficulties with his mother. He said he had to find a way to solve the problem. When James left around 11 o'clock, he came back an hour and a half later, and Wanda asked him if he had solved the issue. Apparently, James replied, "No, not yet," and sat drinking until the place closed at 2:30 a.m. The next day was Easter Sunday. After stumbling home after a night of too many drinks, James tucked himself into bed and slept for the majority of Easter Sunday. Meanwhile, Leonard and Alma brought their 8 children between the ages of 4 and 17 to visit their grandmother Charity at her house at 635 Minor Avenue around 4 p.m. James stayed upstairs, sleeping off his hangover, while the kids enjoyed an Easter egg hunt in the front yard. Afterward, they came back inside and played in the living room, while Charity, Alma, and Leonard finished lunch preparations. Finally, summoned by the commotion, James woke up and went downstairs. He was greeted by Leonard, who said, "How's the Volkswagen?" Something in that simple question seemed to push Leonard over the edge. He didn't say a word, but returned to his room upstairs. And then around 6 p.m., when Charity was in the kitchen making sloppy joes alongside Leonard, Alma, and 3 of their children, James returned with his .357 Magnum, 2 .22 caliber handguns, and a rifle. He stepped into the kitchen and immediately shot his brother in the head, followed by Alma and Charity. After ensuring they were dead, James killed 11-year-old David, 9-year-old Teresa, and 13-year-old Carol. He then walked into the living room and shot the rest of his family, killing his nephews 4-year-old John, 15-year-old Thomas, and 16-year-old Michael, 17-year-old Leonard III as well, before finally killing 12-year-old niece Anne. The entire massacre was over within less than 5 minutes, and most of the victims being shot more than once to ensure that no one survived. In all, 35 shots had been fired. Afterward, James took his time. He spent 3 hours in the house, along with 11 dead bodies, maybe weighing his options, while the blood soaked through the floorboards. Finally, James changed his clothes and called the police, calmly saying, "There's been a shooting here." James waited for the police at the front door. He was arrested and charged that day with 11 counts of aggravated homicide. Authorities quoted James as saying, quote, "My mother drove me crazy by always combing my hair, talked to me like I was a baby, and tried to make me into a homosexual." That is definitely not a reason to shoot 11 people to death, but the comment gave the police an idea of James's state of mind. Afterward, he was generally uncooperative. James didn't answer any questions and made it clear he was going for an insanity defense. Prosecutors believed that this was a calculated decision, with James hoping to be cured of his mental illness so that he would eventually be released and then free to receive the $300,000 inheritance. But while it was clear that James was a person who suffered from a severe paranoia and operated under a well-developed delusion system, even believing that family members, the police, and the FBI were involved in a long-standing conspiracy to persecute him, prosecutors did not want this to end with a not guilty verdict. News of the massacre at the Hamilton home spread like wildfire. Nobody could believe that this quiet, unassuming man had just killed his whole family. While nobody could deny he was a little strange and a loner, James was still seen as friendly, modest, and a helpful citizen who had never had problems with police before. How does a person like that become a mass murderer? Some even refused to acknowledge that James Ruppert was a killer. It wasn't until more details of the brutal massacre were released that denial finally turned into anger. During his first trial that was held in Hamilton, a panel of 3 judges found James Ruppert guilty of all 11 counts of murder and sentenced him to life in prison. But due to a legal technicality, the decision was overturned and James got a brand new trial, this time in Findlay, 125 miles north. The reasoning was that James had never got a fair trial in Hamilton, in his hometown, where everybody wanted him put away forever. The second trial began in June 1975. By then, prosecutors had time to gather new evidence, including James's statements about, quote, solving his problem, like he had told people at the bar the day before, him engaging in target practice shortly before the massacre, and asking about silencers for his gun collection. When the verdict came through in July, it didn't surprise anybody. James Ruppert was once again found guilty and sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences. But wait, there's more. James appealed the verdict and was granted yet another trial in 1982. As his defense attorney, Hugh Holbrook, believed James was really insane, he personally funded the hiring of expert psychiatrists and psychologists from all over the country to prove the case. And this time, the outcome was different. On July 23, 1982, another 3-judge panel found James Ruppert guilty of only 2 murders, his mother and his brother. On the other counts, the murders of his sister-in-law and 8 nieces and nephews, James was found not guilty by reason of insanity. In the end, he received 2 life sentences to be served consecutively. James managed to dodge the death penalty, as the capital punishment had been suspended in the United States from 1972 to 1976 due to the Supreme Court's decision. Today, James Ruppert continues to serve his sentence at the Franklin Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. In April 2015, the state parole board denied his release. The next hearing is scheduled for February 2025. By then, James will be 90 years old, so there's a pretty good chance that Easter Sunday mass murderer will take his final breath behind bars. And yes, Cinnamon Baker did move in to 635 Minor Avenue, where only the bloodstains under the floorboards reminded of the dark history of that house. That's today's 10-Minute Murder, brief and bingeable true crime. Thanks for listening today, and before you go, connect with the podcast on social media if you want to take a look at the visuals that go along with these episodes. I don't post graphic and gross photos. I mean, while I'm finding the ones that I do post, I usually see the ones that they give me nightmares, to be honest. But I know that you probably don't want me to force those nightmares on you, so I don't post that. You could go and get that for yourself. I mean, you can Google it. It's pretty simple. Also, I'd probably get banned from Facebook and Instagram if I did try to post that. Not Twitter, though. That's like the Wild West. Anything goes on Twitter. But if, like I said, if you do want to see those gross photos, you're more than welcome to ask Jeeves yourself. They're there. Subscribe to 10-Minute Murder wherever you're listening right now so that you don't miss any episodes in the future. And lastly, tell your friends, your coworkers, your family, coworkers that feel like family that feels like coworkers, all of those people. Tell them about 10-Minute Murder. Thanks for listening. Be safe and have a good night.